Now, the South African Council of Churches is horrified by the brutality of the South African Police Service as a means of dispersing crowds during protests. Earlier this week, a 35-year-old man, Mthokozisi Ntumba, was allegedly killed by police in Braamfontein during a protest by Wits students. Mthokozisi had walked out of the doctor's offices onto the streets when the police shot at him. Now, the South African Council of Churches is calling for a review of the use of rubber bullets and for all live ammunition to be discontinued when dealing with unarmed civilians in any crowd control situation. The General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, Bishop Mthokozisi, joins us now to give us more details on this. Your Grace, good evening, and thank you very much for your time tonight on the news at Prime. Now, we are all emotionally affected by the scenes that we saw playing out in Braamfontein this week. One would say either our outrage is not strong enough or simply we are being outraged, and that in itself is not enough.
Hey, I think I should say we are actually exhausted with the outrage, because time and time again the same thing happens. And this is why we think it must be in the DNA of the South African police. I mean, look, you've got very good people, they do a good job, but there must be something in the training which is lacking. And we believe that there is value in, I don't know if they don't do this, but it does look like they do, that including in the training something about the human rights culture and the dignity of the human person. I mean, you can even look at the way they handled those pastors from Sebokeng. You think that they were carrying a bag of potatoes.
Yeah.
So there is something about the dignity of the human person that needs to be infused into the training, but also, I think, an ongoing repeat. I don't know if they don't do these things. I can't, but I'm just assuming that that might just help. If they include that, as well as bring the police on a regular training that reminds them of these things, because surely crowd control cannot begin with a bullet.
And Ristatana, Collins cause. I mean, the names are endless. We
can go.
Marikana. We can just keep going. Are we having productive conversations with the police? And I mean, is it helpful, this thing of saying, well, you guys are just not trained enough in public order policing? I mean, we are having conversation around the use of rubber bullets in public order policing, for example, and live ammunition over and over again. It seems they are not getting to a point where they change the behavior. So are these conversations helpful?
Well, the view that we have is that the outrage and the statements that we make are not adequate. What we need is a proper engagement. So the church leaders would want to actually sit down very sympathetically and understandingly with the Minister of Police and the brass and the police, just to understand these missing pieces. Because we can't keep burying people that have been shot by police, because it brings a cycle of displeasure. People need the police. We desperately need good policing.
Yeah.
That we need for sure. But you want to have a relationship between the police and the community that is aggrieved with one thing or the other, because South Africa is not going to protest. We are a democracy. There will always be protests, but these protests must be handled by a police force that is also understanding of the rights of these people.
How do we take this sound of displeasure that clearly is coming from all quarters, I mean, including the president, who was also very disappointed at the scenes that he saw and how the police behaved. Even the Minister of Police saying those people were not acting like police officers. In fact, he doesn't even have any defense for that type of behavior. How do we take this sound of dissatisfaction, or even say the sound of alarm, and translate that into tangible action that will prevent this from repeating itself?
And this is why, on our part, I think you know this by now, we always do this. Whenever we've got an issue with anybody, we go to them and talk to them. We want to sit down with the minister and the brass just to understand what we believe is lacking, they must reassure us that it's not lacking. And if it is lacking, they assure us that they are going to put it in. Because we cannot explain this. These police are members of our community. They are our children. They are our husbands. They are our daughters, our wives, our mothers as society. So they don't belong to outer space. So they must have a sense. That's why we think that it's not enough to make statements. We must sit down and say, can we have a conversation about this?
Yeah. The other broader conversation, and we had this conversation as well with the students earlier in the week, by the way, before the tragedy even happened. And the question was, why do we need a crisis to act? How do we deal with that? It always takes a tragedy, it takes a crisis, it takes the spilling over into something else before we hear now, well, cabinet set and they told higher education, go and reprioritize funding, students must be funded. Why did that action not happen before we were in a crisis situation?
I said I was exhausted with police brutality. I don't know what I am with the matter of students. With every year is almost seasonal. You know it's going to happen. You know, I mean, we had all kinds of actions. We've been doing this for the last, I don't know how long. We're dealing with the issue of historical debt. We're dealing with the issue of registration, fees. Every year, this is the same thing. So it's not even about this year. It's about saying, what exactly is the strategy of government in this regard? Doesn't anybody actually plan ahead of that? I mean, you would be, if you had the president of the SACC here, he would be going stuttering because he is so angry. He says, what kind of thinking goes on here? Why do we have this every year? I mean, he was lashing out at me on the phone.
Yeah.
As if I'm responsible.
And I understand the frustration. I'm equally frustrated. Are we to believe then maybe that our lawmakers, and particularly those in governance, are just really just not interested or motivated enough to change the situation, to at least come up with a solid plan to fund our higher education in this country?
I'm asking that question because we did all the engagements. We had meetings. I mean, the SACC began to get into this in the very earliest part of Fees Must Fall in 2015. And we worked with the students in these most difficult times. And we worked with Judge Musaneke in a group. We had several meetings with the government. I don't know why and what needs to be done differently. I can't understand it. And this is why Bishop Siwa is furious. He says, look, I'm at my wit's end. If I had hair, I would pull it out. He doesn't have much left.
Indeed. So, well, I mean, we're hoping this engagement that you're going to have with the top brass, with the minister, with the police, with all that are involved is going to yield some tangible results. And certainly, Bishop, we can not have this conversation again when it's time for registration next year.
Please allow me a moment, if you would.
Yes, indeed. Go for it.
Thank you. I want to just say, this is in connection with the passing away of the Zulu King. We are very distressed. We think that the king will go to his grave a very, very distressed man, because last year he lost two members of the family, his sister in July and his son in November. And we would like to extend our condolences to the Zulu Royal House. And we have sent a message, but we think that it's important for everybody to appreciate the pain that so many people are experiencing at this time. I say this because somebody called me just to cry. Somebody called me from KZN just to cry. And I said, what's the matter? The king has died. So that's how impactful. You know, he was a man, he had his faults, but he was very committed to the development. The only time he would ever call me would be to say, come and spend half a day with me to talk about how we can deal with poverty in this area. And that's the kind of person he was.
Bishop, we appreciate your tribute tonight, and thank you very much for joining us on News at Prime. Bishop Mpumulwane, the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches.